Welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video. This is the second of the bottles I'm trying from the most recent case I had delivered from Tom at Fingal Rock. This is a series of wines I have had before, but I think this is the first time, at least on camera, to try this particular vintage. So this is Philippe Gavignet, a producer that Tom at Fingal Rock particularly specialises in, and it's a Nuits Saint Georges Premier Cru from a vineyard called Les Pruliers. The vintage is the bit that's different. I've definitely reviewed, tasted, I don't know if review is too lofty a term, definitely tasted at least one of those wines from that vineyard from this producer. But I think it's the first time I've covered this vintage. Where is the vintage label? I'm pointing there, it's here, 2017. Often when I'm pouring the wine, it ends up happening off the bottom of the screen, doesn't it? I don't really pay attention to where the camera's pointing at. The colour is starting to kind of deepen a bit. There's a tiny hint of browning to that, I think. It's probably really hard to get a sense for that on camera, and the lighting, as always, is far from perfect. First nose before giving that a swirl. Possibly a bit of cherry, a little bit faint if it is. Somehow thinking of hedgerowy fruits as well here. I don't know what wild cherry smells like, but I imagine it might be something a bit like this. But it is a slightly more sort of rustic, hedgerowy version of the fruit. I think there's some berry fruit in there as well. Surprisingly, interestingly rustic. Let's see what bit of agitation does to that. Slightly brighter, I think red berry fruit type nose there. There might be a bit of red cherry, but I think I'm also getting something possibly slightly strawberry, raspberry-ish. Still a tiny bit on the hedgerowy side, which is interesting. I don't know if that's possibly a facet of aging. This is now 8 years old, and if I have tried this before, it would have been when it was much younger. Possibly what I'm detecting as a slight sort of hedgerowy note could be very early emergence of some sort of sous-bois or mushroomy character. There's definitely plenty of sous-bois around me currently. I am effectively sitting in a hedge. So I think as part of that hedgerow thing, there is a slight hint of something like rosehip as well, I think there. Yeah, none of that very familiar from the sort of Gavignet house style, which I think of as very kind of pure, luscious fruit. This is all a bit more slightly rustic, I think. Perhaps with a sip, I will recalibrate that sense. Interesting. It is going a little bit dry, a little bit savoury. Again, I wonder if these are possibly, could be signs of aging, or could even be that this just needs a little while to open up. That's a little bit on the restrained, austere, sort of savoury side, not in a necessarily bad way, in a slightly more kind of, there's almost an elegance to it, I suppose. It's not just the classic kind of big, rich fruit bomb that I've become familiar with from a lot of Gavignet wines, that style that I know and love. This is a bit lighter, a bit more restrained, noticing tannins or a slight bitterness to that, a bit more than in other wines. I think I'm noticing a bit more of something floral on the nose. I think, again, that's somewhere in the ballpark of wild rose hip, something like that. A lot about this is talking to me of hedgerows. Surprisingly, slightly restrained, slightly tannic, slightly savoury, not so big on the luscious, opulent fruit kind of palate. I wonder if I need to let this air for a bit and come back to it. I'll give this a lot more swirling, possibly pour out a second glass. I do get the sense this is going to do something quite different with a little bit of air, but initially it's all a bit, what am I saying in summary, hedgerowy, a little bit rustic, a little bit sort of gentle and restrained. I'm not getting that big, luscious, ripe, juicy fruit that I'm familiar with as a sort of Gavignet house style. Perhaps that will come later. I may stop talking for now and come back to this a bit later. I'm here for a while, so I will actually have an opportunity to come back to this. This has had 45 minutes of airing, something like that. I think that hedgerowy, rustic character I was getting on the nose to start off with. On further reflection, I think that actually is a bit of kind of mushroomy, possibly sous-bois, forest floor sort of character. So it's less the top of the hedge and more the bottom of the hedge. There is definitely a hint of mushroom there. Quite a strong hint, actually, I think. I don't recall ever really encountering that before in Gavignet's wines, which are normally really just about fruit expression. I believe that mushroomy or sous-bois forest floor character can be something that is just in a wine from the outset. I have occasionally encountered that in surprisingly young wines, but it's also something that can develop with age, a tertiary characteristic that can come into the wine with age. One thing Tom always said about 2017, I think it's part of the reason I like this vintage so much, because I was drinking those wines relatively young to begin with, is that it's a forward vintage. It's a vintage that had matured quite quickly, become ready quite quickly. And perhaps correspondingly that means 2017 is now getting into middle age a bit more quickly than you might think. It is only 8 years old, but that is definitely, to me, giving hints of a fairly mature Burgundy, a fairly middle-aged sort of Burgundy. I don't know how you would normally peg middle-aged. Perhaps 8 years is middle-aged, I don't know. But my guess is those mushroomy characters weren't there before, and it's something that's come on a bit more quickly because there's some facet of this vintage that means the whole aging process is sort of sped up slightly. I think that could just be nonsense, I don't know. So we have that. I think the fruit character there, I think it is still sort of hedgerowy and interestingly rustic, and I kind of like that, and I think it works somehow with that mushroominess. And on the palate now, with this, 45 minutes or whatever it's been of airing, of settling down, of me getting used to it. The mouthfeel is a little bit silkier than I was thinking at first. I'm still noticing a bit more tannin again than I normally would in a Gavignet wine. That's another house style I think of Gavignet, is that they're very soft tannins, very gentle, barely noticeable tannins usually. And that is more tannic. Perhaps this is the wood in that hedgerow and that forest floor. There's a little bit more woodiness to that than I normally find, but also quite a nice silky mouthfeel and a nice level of concentration that I perhaps didn't notice before. I was focusing more on the kind of the savoury characters, the fact it was a little bit austere. I think austere was unfair. By this point I think the word austere is unfair. There is a nice sort of, again, slightly rustic, slightly woody sort of fruitiness, but there is some nice fruit there on the palate, but it's accompanied by all these other things, and partly they're coming with age. A bit of sort of mineral character there as well, along with that slight savouriness. It is a bit different, but it's got a seriousness to it that I am warming to. That's been very long-winded, hasn't it? More rustic, more hedgerowy, more mushroomy, more forest flory, a little bit more woody, a little bit more tannic, and all of those things that I'm used to with a Gavignet wine, but there is still quite a nice silky core of fruit there. I hope some of that was coherent. I might stop talking on the wine front for now. It's going to be dark soon anyway, so too dark to see. See if I can perhaps squeeze in a bit of dinner, and perhaps this, as I say, will be a nice accompaniment to that. Cheers. I'm going to make, for I think probably the third time, essentially the same meal for dinner. I have my little compact camping stove, I have my billy can with me. I just raided the cupboard, so this was not a well-planned meal. This was a sort of last-minute decision to try and do a little bit of al fresco cooking. So I have just some pasta I grabbed from the cupboards, found I had some dried porcini in, and that little box has some grated Parmesan-like cheese. I think this is the third time now, isn't it? A kind of porcini pasta dish with some cheese. And it really is those three ingredients, and that, well, there's water obviously to boil the pasta and rehydrate the porcini, but 4 ingredients if you include water. Very, very simple dish. The Parmesan type cheese does the job of seasoning. That's where all the salt is coming from. The porcini adds the umami, and most of the flavour comes from that, and this is just carbs, isn't it? There is my gas stove, good old trusty billy can. I love this thing. Here is some dried porcini. I'm going to tip that into there. It might as well be in the water while the water is coming up to the boil. That will give it extra time to hydrate. And pour in. I only have a tiny bit of water. I was actually at a chalybeate spring or chalybeate well earlier. I probably could have used some water from there, couldn't I? I suppose if I'm boiling it, it ought to be fine. I was a bit unsure about how clean that would be. Anyway. That can go on there. The lid can go on. Start by just bringing that up to the boil. I do have that, I don't know if it really does very much, I do have that windshield thing. So I put that around, whatever difference that makes. Perhaps it makes a difference, I don't know. Just needs to be a bit higher really, doesn't it? I think I'm seeing steam coming out of that. Oh look, we have a rolling boil, so I'll turn that off, let that sit for, I don't know if I'll let it sit for a whole half an hour, but something like that. So that porcini can hydrate. What a lovely waft of porcini I'm getting now. The porcini in the billy can has had about 15 minutes of soaking, and again, as I said, it was in the water while that water was coming up to the boil. I'm getting a bit impatient now, so I think I'm just going to start cooking the pasta, and it's going to have to be in the same pan because I don't have any other receptacles. So let's get this billy back on there. Same shot. Yeah, well the light is also fading, which is another impetus to get this all moving a bit. I'm going to empty in some of this pasta in a somewhat slapdash fashion. It's basically going to be decided by how much I think I can reasonably fit in, and I'll top that up with whatever water I have left as well. Right, give that all a stir. Hopefully nothing is going to stick directly to the bottom. Getting a bit dark now, isn't it? But that's had about 9-10 minutes. These cooking conditions are not perfect for pasta, of course, because it's so constrained, isn't it? Look, I don't know if you can see that, but there isn't a lot of water to pasta ratio. So I tried a bit just now. Let me try another piece of this pasta. It's pretty much there, but it is very much on the al dente side. So I might actually turn this off and let it sit for a couple of minutes. That will help it finish cooking. Had to put on the light attachment. As I always say, it kills the mood a bit, but this has been sitting for a few minutes now. Let's taste a little bit of that pasta. I think it's probably going to be at an acceptable level. Yep, that is fine. So I'll just drain off a bit of the liquid, and then the finishing touch, put a bit of that cheese in. There was actually barely any liquid to drain off there. I think it's just been absorbed by some combination of the porcini and the pasta. So as I say, final touch, sorry about the rummaging noises. I grated some Parmesan-esque cheese at home, and just put all that in, and this will, I think, as I probably said at the outset, also provide the seasoning, because there's no salt in here other than this cheese. And Parmesan or Parmesan-esque cheese is actually pretty salty. Obviously this would look a lot more elegant in a home cooking setting where this would be on a plate rather than all squashed into a billy can. But these are the practicalities of minimalistic outdoor cooking. Hopefully you understand the trade-offs involved therein. Should probably give you an evaluation of sorts of this. The pasta is cooked perfectly, I think, now. Combination of stopping it just before it was properly al dente, giving it a couple of minutes to rest. I think I've just about hit the perfect level there. It's a real transformation adding the cheese in. There's so much of that umami flavour from the porcini, but it is missing something without any kind of seasoning, without any salt, essentially. That salty cheese going in there suddenly makes that really delicious, I think. Full of umami, full of savoury flavours, full of salt. Probably not hideously salty overall. There's a twinge of sweetness from porcini, isn't there? It's really probably my favourite mushroom. Surely everyone's favourite mushroom. Anyone who really is interested in mushrooms. Porcini is the king. Ideally, you really should drain the porcini after rehydrating it, because there is often a little bit of sediment, basically dirt, in there. It's good to keep the rehydration liquid because that's full of flavour, but you ideally would strain it to get rid of the bits of grit. And I have not done that here because I didn't really have a vessel to strain it into, or any other cooking implements or equipment. The top of the dish does not taste gritty or dirty or earthy. Maybe I'll experience a bit of that towards the bottom, I don't know, but I think I'm getting away with it for now. And you know, in terms of food hygiene, this has all been boiled to death, so I doubt it's going to be problematic in that sense. But you know, obviously no one wants to eat grit, do they? I'm not sure there's much more to add to that. I'm very much enjoying this. There is something delightful about having this incredibly compact. If you can see the size of my bag, tiny backpack, but I managed to fit a bottle of wine and all the stuff I need to cook a very basic meal out here in the woods in that. And there's something incredibly satisfying, I think, about that. So this pathetic dribble that is currently left in my wine glass. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Cheers.